When someone is missing, it doesn't always mean something sinister has happened. Sometimes it just means that that person cannot be found for whatever the reason may be. Those cases are in the minority though, and with this very peculiar case, we have no idea how, why, or even when the person went missing. This may be one of those cases where the person is just unaccounted for. Or is it? Interpol has referred to this case as the strangest missing persons case in Europe. Let's talk about Juan Pedro Martinez Gomez. This case was honestly one of the most challenging I have ever researched. It is so strange, yet there is not much there about it here in the US, and the most detailed articles are completely in Spanish. So I had to translate entire articles into English as well as hopefully pronounce the numerous locations and surnames correctly. In fact, I was quite pleased when I did research this case in preparation for this podcast that my original article from 2019 was one of the few sources listed as a reference. By searching worldwide again recently, I did also find a few YouTube videos as well as a detailed article from 2023 by Spanish true crime journalist Mika Navarro that was a great resource. So I'll be using some of that information in this podcast. This mystery takes place in Spain. Andres Martinez was a truck driver from Fuente Alamo, Murcia. On June 24th, 1986, at around 7 p.m., he picked up a load of approximately 5,200 gallons of almost pure 98% sulfuric acid in a Volvo F12 tanker truck that he was in the process of buying. His load was to go from the city of Cartagena to Bilbao in Spain's Basque Country, which was roughly a 500-mile trip. He had his wife Carmen Gomez along with him, as she did occasionally accompany him on his travels. After a seemingly ordinary trip thus far, Andre's truck was observed driving erratically at approximately 6:30 a.m. on June 25th near the port of Somosierra, north of Madrid, Spain. It appears as he was descending the mountainous area, his speed was initially around only 12 miles an hour. Then, according to the Civil Guard report, he appeared to lose the effectiveness of his braking system and started gaining speed until reaching around 68 miles per hour. Andres controlled the vehicle during the curves, but then reached a straightaway in which he passed three other trucks, taking the rearview mirror off of one and grazing another. But a fourth truck appeared that was traveling towards him in the same lane that he could not avoid, and he collided with it head-on, creating a horrific crash. At the deadly scene, extremely flammable sulfuric acid began to flow from the rear of the truck, causing small explosions and a toxic cloud over the accident site. The Civil Guard had to work quickly to avoid the hazardous fluid from reaching the nearby Duraton River and creating an ecological disaster. They had an urgent shipment of 33,000 pounds of lime trucked in. The lime, along with sand, was quickly spread to absorb the acid. The road was reportedly closed from 7 a.m. to after midnight of that night to clean up the deadly spill. During the catastrophe, 3 nearby villages were left without water. Several firefighters and civil guardsmen were also affected and suffered burns from the toxic acid in the air. As soon as it was safe to approach the cab of the truck, rescuers viewed a horrific scene. Sadly, Andres and his wife Carmen had died on impact, the effects of the sulfuric acid spill already starting to affect their bodies. It would be several hours after the crash before they could safely be removed from the scene. When the authorities phoned Carmen's mother later that day to tell her of the tragic news, her words would turn this already sad case into a perplexing mystery. She simply said,
"What about the child? Please tell me at least the child is fine."
The question took law enforcement by complete surprise Their response?
What child? There was no child in the truck.
They had no idea there was a child in the truck, as only 2 bodies were recovered. It was then revealed that Andres and Carmen's only child, a 10-year-old son named Juan Pedro Martinez Gomez, had in fact accompanied them on their trip. It was a reward for the good grades Juan Pedro had received recently. He was looking forward to seeing the sights, especially the cows, and the family had planned on traveling to the Basque Country after the load of acid was delivered. However, when the truck crashed, it appeared that Juan Pedro was not inside. But where was he? As soon as the authorities learned there was a child traveling with the couple, an intense and exhaustive search was performed using trained dogs, helicopters, and scores of volunteers. The then captain of the Civil Guard and the person responsible for the search operation, Juan Manuel Sanchez, recalled that all available resources were invested to locate the little boy. We spent more than 2 months traveling bush by bush around that point in the mountains. We couldn't rule out that the little one wouldn't get scared and run through the mountains, but no trace was found within an 18-mile radius. There were a few small items, such as a piece of cloth and some children's cassettes found in the remains, that may have indicated a child had recently been in the truck. The truck was not equipped with a third seat belt, so it was thought initially that Juan Pedro could have been thrown from the vehicle before impact, but no evidence was ever found to support that. The river was near the accident scene, and the search for him in that area came up empty. They even brought in a crane and an excavator to lift up the remains of the semi to see if he was buried beneath in the sand and lime, but that also proved fruitless. Then, upon further inspection of the crashed truck, another mystery would emerge. Considering the high speed Andres was traveling in his truck with very hazardous material, the first thought was that his brakes had failed. That would be the only logical explanation for his reckless driving. However, once the truck was examined, it appeared that the brakes were in perfect working order. For some still unknown reason, Andres seemed to be going that speed on purpose. During the investigation, it was revealed that Andres Martinez's truck was fitted with a tachograph, as is common and even required sometimes with commercial vehicles on his truck. For those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, it is an instrument that logs the working speed of the engine, so it basically measures the speed of the vehicle. This instrument would provide a wealth of information about the hours and minutes leading up to the incident, but what it would reveal would further complicate and mystify what, at the beginning, appeared to be just a tragic accident. With the help of the tachograph, they were able to piece together a timeline of the travels of that fateful trip. It is said that several stops were made which seemed to be routine for gas, meals, and perhaps to rest. It is believed the trip began at 7 p.m. the following night, and reported stops were made at 9 p.m., 12:12 a.m., 3 a.m., 4:13 a.m., 5 a.m., and the last explained stop was at 5:20 a.m. During the last explained stop, the family of 3 were all seen together at the Aragon Inn in Cabanillas de la Sierra, where they had stopped for breakfast. There were witnesses at some of these stops interviewed, and they did confirm that Juan Pedro was traveling with his parents. He was wearing a matching red sweater and pants that seemed to be memorable to the witnesses. The waiter at the inn, Felipe Alhambra, remembers that the family sat at the table for 20 minutes eating their breakfast. He didn't specifically see the young child get back in the truck with his parents, but did watch the tanker truck leaving the parking area, driving normally. The tachograph also revealed, next to Juan Pedro's absence, the most perplexing fact of the case. The last several minutes before the crash are shrouded in mystery. According to the reading, in the last 80 minutes of the trip, the truck stopped 12 times, ranging from 1 to 20 seconds each stop, and had varying speeds. There were no traffic jams or accidents on that stretch of road at that time of day to correspond with these stops. What was the reason for this erratic behavior? In a case with so many unanswered questions, there really is little more than speculation to go on. Of course, the two main questions are, where is Juan Pedro, and why was his father driving so erratically before the fatal crash? He was undoubtedly familiar with that area, being a truck driver, and the roads near the Somosierra Mountains where the accident took place are known to be steep with sharp turns and cliffs. There are a few different theories about what may have happened that tragic day that we will now go over. The most unsettling theory about the missing child was, given how deadly sulfuric acid is, could the extremely toxic chemical have actually dissolved the remains of Juan Pedro? Scientists were quick to point out that this was not possible. They even did an experiment on animal remains, and it took at least 5 days for the bones of the remains to be affected by the acid. So the scientists said it was virtually impossible, even if Juan Pedro would have been submerged in the acid itself, like if acid filled up the cab of the truck, to have been completely consumed. There would have been something left of him: bones, teeth, buttons from his clothing. Plus, the fact that his parents were in the crash and their remains were intact went against this theory. The only piece of anything that was found at the scene of value as far as possible identification was the sole of a shoe that they said may have been Juan Pedro's size, but was never conclusively tied to him. Another theory was perhaps this incident involved drug trafficking. It isn't known or really believed that Andres was involved in transporting drugs. His truck was disassembled a year after the crash, and there was reportedly a small amount of heroin found in the tanker area of the truck. However, he was still paying on the truck and hadn't had it very long, so it was unknown who could be responsible for the contraband. Was it possible that Juan Pedro could have been kidnapped on the journey, perhaps by drug traffickers, who then forced Andres to transport drugs for them before they would return his son? To expand on that theory, Carmen's brother Juan Garcia Lagas and her cousin Pedro Gomez were 28 and 29 years old when the accident occurred and were baffled by the young boy's disappearance. They decided to leave their jobs temporarily and spent 3 years investigating the whereabouts of Juan Pedro. In the following years until today, they go to as many media outlets as possible to defend the theory they built based on all the data they collected in a parallel investigation that revealed the abundant gaps in the official theory. Both maintain that the stops only lasting a few seconds that the truck made were because another vehicle in front of them kept braking and forcing it to stop. Until the 22-second stop in which, according to the two relatives, whoever was there took the opportunity to take Juan Pedro as a guarantee that the truck driver would fulfill the order they had forced him to do. They took the child away at the last stop. They took it out of the parents' hands and forced them to carry something, probably drugs, says Juan Garcia Lagas. The two relatives also appeared on the Spanish program Expedient Marlaska a few years ago and reiterated their theory about Juan Pedro being kidnapped and his father forced to comply to their unknown demands. They go on to say that they believe Juan Pedro was not released by the captors because he had witnessed what happened and would have told everything. The drug trafficking theory was never conclusively proven, of course, but I will say that the Juan Rada recalled that in those years, Bilbao led the European ranking of heroin consumption, and the Murcian coast was the gateway for drug traffickers. Juan Pedro's family has also learned through their research that there was a police checkpoint near Somosierra during the time of the accident, and it is thought that a semi transporting hazardous chemicals would not be thought to be involved in anything drug related. This could explain the erratic behavior and the stops and speed variations. If perhaps Andres were following a vehicle that contained his kidnapped son, the missing boy's relatives also claim that during their own investigation, they would frequently receive threatening phone calls. They even wanted their phones tapped by police to try to figure out exactly who they could be coming from, but there was no mention if this was ever done. They suspect these calls came from a very important criminal network. There was a very odd reported sighting of a mysterious couple right after the accident happened. The details are vague and, of course, can't be completely verified, but some witnesses claim a couple driving a white Nissan Vanette pulled up to the accident scene. A male with a mustache and a Nordic-looking blonde female wearing long coats emerged from the vehicle. The man stated that his wife was a nurse, and they stopped briefly and spoke with the man from one of the other trucks, who was alive but badly injured. Witnesses say the unknown man appeared to be searching for something. They then are reported to have taken a small package out of Andre's crashed semi and quickly left. Some reports also say there was an elderly woman who stayed in the vehicle while the couple approached the crash scene. Unfortunately, all efforts to find this couple were unsuccessful. There were a few unconfirmed sightings of Juan Pedro after he went missing. As is usually the case, most of them didn't have any merit. There is one, though, that, although cannot be verified, is worth mentioning. It involved the owner of a driving school in Madrid. They stated in May of 1987, several months after the accident, a blind woman of Iranian descent entered their business asking for the location of the U.S. Embassy. The woman stated that she and her family had escaped the Khomeini's regime 6 months prior and were living off of charity. She was accompanied by a guide, a boy who appeared to be around 10 years old. The boy spoke Spanish and seemed to have an accent from a nearby region, which struck the teacher as strange. When they mentioned what impressive Spanish he spoke after only being there for 6 months, the Iranian woman changed the subject. The teacher also said the boy seemed disoriented. The teacher was surprised when they were alerted to the disappearance that happened several months prior. After viewing a photo, the teacher is convinced the mysterious 10-year-old with the surprisingly good Spanish accent was Juan Pedro. After coming forward to authorities with their belief, unfortunately, they were not able to locate the woman or the boy again to confirm or rule out that it was him. Juan Pedro's family was understandably devastated about the events of that day. They not only lost 2 beloved family members to a violent crash, but lost Juan Pedro without knowing how or why. They spent a considerable amount of money in their search for him and put out 85,000 posters on the streets, schools, town halls, and post offices. They also hired a detective well known for working on missing persons cases, but sadly none of their efforts were rewarded. Is it possible that all these years later, Juan Pedro could be alive and well? It is strange that he was never located right after the accident after a comprehensive search in the area. But the possibility is there, although slim, that someone saw a boy wandering in distress and picked him up. Since the accident was a catastrophic event in the area, it would have been easy to find out that the boy's parents had passed away. Could someone have taken him in and raised him? When searching on the internet before I prepared this podcast, I did see an interesting link on a Reddit thread about someone who looked a great deal like Juan Pedro. In fact, he did have 3 of the same 4 names as the missing child and did live near where the family was from. I found this very intriguing, so I located his social media profiles and actually reached out to him on the slim chance he would actually be the boy who went missing after this tragic accident, although admittedly the ages are a few years off. I haven't heard back at the time of recording this podcast, but if I do, I will keep you updated. As far as my opinion, it's hard to really say I have a clear-cut theory on this case. The fact that Juan Pedro was with them one moment and gone the next is very perplexing. There is a slight chance that he was thrown from the vehicle and just never located. But after such an exhaustive search immediately after the crash, it seems hard to believe. I think there is more than just speculation to give the kidnap theory a second look. His father was driving recklessly for some unknown reason on winding mountain roads, all the while knowing he was carrying deadly chemicals with his family on board. Logic tells me it had to have been a very serious situation in his mind. What could be more dire than trying to save your kidnapped son? The strange stops and starts in the last minute of his journey make me wonder if Andres was following a vehicle up the pass. Perhaps the automobile he was following was abruptly starting and stopping, so in turn he had to do the same thing. At the end, right before the crash, perhaps the vehicle he was following sped up, and Andres did the same, but lost control and crashed. If Juan Pedro had been taken as leverage so that his father would transport drugs, I'm sure it was very unexpected that there would be a crash and that the people being extorted would die. Then what would happen to Juan Pedro? Were the mysterious couple in the vehicle a factor? They could have been in on something sinister that was happening, and if Andres was forced to transport drugs, perhaps the duo stopped and got the drugs out of the truck after it crashed and before emergency personnel and the police could arrive. Perhaps they were following the truck, which is why they were able to be on the scene of the crash so quickly. Was Juan Pedro ultimately given away, perhaps to the Iranian woman who needed a guide? Or was he killed and disposed of? Perhaps he survived the crash and disoriented left the scene and was taken in and kept hidden for some reason. Is there a chance he could still be alive today, as he would only be in his late 40s? Or are these scenarios too far-fetched and just an easier explanation for the family to accept than that their beloved family member was taken from this world that day along with his parents? It is so haunting to think what could have occurred in the last few minutes of Andres Martinez and Carmen Gomez's lives, and if they were in fear before their horrible deaths. We can only hope that Juan Pedro is found, dead or alive, one day, and his remaining relatives can finally know what happened during that ominous trip. That concludes the podcast on Juan Pedro Martinez Gomez. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find my podcast, Lost and Found Podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. I try to have a new podcast posted every 2 weeks. As always, you can find all of my articles as well as links to my latest podcasts on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.